Everybody always mentions the Mahomes versus Allen rivalry, but to me, that's not a real one. Josh has never beat Pat in the playoffs and hasn't even made a Super Bowl. But the rivalry Patrick Mahomes had with Joe Burrow was something special. Mike Hilton on the sideline after beating the Bills and saying,
"We'll see y'all in Burrowhead."
Not Arrowhead, but Burrowhead. The Cincinnati Bengals had beaten Mahomes 3 straight times, and they were headed back to Kansas City for the AFC Championship game again, and they wanted everyone to know it. But here's the thing about poking a wounded animal. Sometimes the animal bites back. Before any of this makes any sense, you have to understand what Patrick Mahomes already was by the time Joe Burrow entered the league. Mahomes took over as the Chiefs starter in 2018 and immediately looked like something the NFL hadn't seen in years. He threw for 5,097 yards, 50 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. He won the MVP in just his first full season as a starter. The Chiefs won 12-4. He was only 23 years old. I mean, nobody does that, except for Dan Marino. And he didn't slow down. Kansas City made the AFC Championship in 2018, won the Super Bowl in 2019, and went back to the Super Bowl in 2020. By the time the 2021 season already kicked off, Mahomes had already accomplished more than most quarterbacks do in their entire career. 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 ring, 1 MVP, and a contract extension that made him the highest paid player in NFL history at the time. He was only 25 and the AFC was his conference, and that wasn't a debate. Now enter Joe Burrow. The Bengals drafted Joe Burrow first overall in 2020 out of LSU, where he just put up one of the greatest college seasons ever. But the team he walked into was a mess. Cincinnati had gone 2-14 the year before. The offensive line was bad, genuinely one of the worst in football. The roster had holes everywhere, and before Burrow could even finish his rookie year, he tore his ACL in week 11. So while Mahomes was hoisting Lombardi trophies and stacking accolades, Burrow was rehabbing a knee and trying to prove he belonged on an NFL field. The trajectories couldn't have been more different. One guy was already the king, the other was still trying to fight to survive. But Burrow came back in 2021 and the Bengals looked different. He threw for 4,611 yards, 34 touchdowns, and had a passer rating of 108.3. Jamar Chase, his college teammate and the team's first round pick that year, immediately became one of the most dangerous receivers in football. Cincinnati finished 10-6 and made the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. And the narrative started shifting. Burrow was cool, confident, and stylish. He carried himself like someone who had already decided he was elite. He wasn't loud about it, but the body language was unmistakable. Joe Burrow wasn't just a quarterback. He was becoming a brand. And then came January 2nd, 2022. Kansas City traveled to Cincinnati in week 17. The Chiefs had already locked up the 1 seed, so the stakes were different for each team. But Burrow didn't play like it was a meaningless game. He threw for 446 yards and 4 TDs. Jamar Chase had 266 yards and 3 scores, including an impossible 3rd and 27 conversion that essentially sealed the game. The Bengals won 34-31, and nobody in the league had beaten Mahomes like that. But the regular season was one thing. 3 weeks later, they'd be going to Arrowhead for the AFC Championship game, and Mahomes would be waiting. The 2021 AFC Championship game was played January 30th, 2022 at Arrowhead Stadium. The Bengals were 7-point underdogs, and nobody outside of Cincinnati gave them a real shot. Mahomes had gone 2-1 in AFC Championship games up to that point, only losing to the GOAT in one of them. His home playoff record was essentially a closed case, and the Chiefs were the Chiefs. For the first half, it looked like what everyone expected. Kansas City came out and dominated. Mahomes hit Tyreek Hill for an early touchdown, then added scores to Travis Kelce and Mecole Hardman. The Chiefs built a 21-3 lead by halftime, and the Bengals looked like exactly what most people thought they were. A young team that had gotten a little too far in the bracket. But here's where the game gets interesting. The second half was a completely different game. The Bengals came out and started moving the ball. Burrow found Samaje Perine on a 41-yard touchdown pass to cut it to 21-10. Then Jamar Chase caught a 2-yard score to tie it at 21. Evan McPherson hit a 52-yard field goal to put Cincinnati ahead 24-21 with just over 6 minutes left in the game. The building, which had been loud all day, suddenly got quiet. Mahomes had the ball back with the chance to win it, and he drove the Chiefs into field goal range, and Harrison Butker tied it at 24 with no time left in regulation. But in overtime, Patrick got the ball first, and it seemed like the story was already written. He's going to walk it off, and that's going to be that. But instead, he threw an awful interception. After the Bengals got the ball, Joe moved them right down the field, and McPherson hit the walk-off field goal from 31 yards, and Bengals win 27-24. A second-year QB had just beaten Patrick Mahomes in his own building in the AFC Championship game, coming back from 18 points down. The narrative that had been building quietly all season exploded overnight. Burrow wasn't just good, he was something different. He was the kind of quarterback who could walk into Arrowhead and take over the game in the second half when the moment was the biggest. Now, some context matters here. Mahomes finished that game with 275 yards and 3 TDs and 2 interceptions. He took 4 sacks and got hit constantly. The Chiefs' offensive line had issues all second half, and Mahomes was forcing throws under pressure in a way that didn't look like him. The Bengals' defense deserved credit. This wasn't just Burrow outplaying Mahomes, it was Cincinnati's whole team showing up when it mattered. But the story the NFL media ran with was simple. Burrow beat Mahomes, and Bengals now own the Chiefs. And honestly, you couldn't blame anyone for telling it that way. The result was a result. Cincinnati went on to the Super Bowl, where they lost to the Rams on a late Matt Stafford drive. It stung, but the future looked wide open. Burrow was only 25, and Chase was just a rookie who put up 1,455 yards. The Bengals were clearly built to compete for years. And then the 2022 regular season started, and they backed it up. Cincinnati went 12-4. Burrow threw for 4,475 yards and 35 touchdowns with just 12 interceptions. The offense was one of the best in football, and T. Higgins was developing into a legitimate number 2 weapon alongside Chase. The team had real depth, real identity, and real belief. The question heading into the 2022 season wasn't whether the Bengals could compete with Kansas City. The question was whether Kansas City could compete with the Bengals. That's how far the power had shifted in 2 years, especially after the offseason the Chiefs had.
Tyreek Hill has been traded from Kansas City to Miami.
Now, nobody knew what to expect after the trades and starting all these rookies, but one person specifically wasn't concerned at all. Mahomes, meanwhile, put together his own strong 2022 campaign, to say the least. 5,250 yards, 41 touchdowns, first team All-Pro, another MVP. The Chiefs went 14-3, and on paper, it looked like 2 freight trains headed towards each other. In Week 13, they met again. The result didn't change anything anyone had already believed. It just made the Bengals louder about it. December 4th, 2022, my birthday. I remember watching this at my favorite restaurant, shout out Red Robin, and I thought the Chiefs were finally going to overcome it. The Bengals hosted the Chiefs at Paycor Stadium. This wasn't the playoffs, but it didn't feel like a regular season game either. Every time these two teams played at this point, it carried weight. The history was too fresh, the stakes were too obvious, and whoever won this game would spend the rest of the season knowing they had the other team's number. Burrow was locked in from the start. He went 25-31 for 286 yards and 2 TDs, completing over 80% of his passes with a passer rating of 126.6. No turnovers and no panic, just methodical, precise execution against the best defense Kansas City could put on the field. The Bengals won 27-24 for the 3rd straight time against Mahomes. 3 straight losses, that was the number. 3 times Patrick had lined up against Burrow and came away with nothing. For a quarterback who had essentially been unbeatable in the AFC for 4 years, that streak was jarring. No other team in the conference had done anything close to this. The Ravens hadn't, the Bills hadn't, and the Bengals had walked into this rivalry as massive underdogs, and now, by every measure that mattered, they owned it. The media fully bought in. The narrative was set. Burrow was Mahomes' kryptonite. The Bengals had figured him out, and Cincinnati was the team to beat in the AFC. Full stop. And look, it wasn't hard to see why people felt that way. The evidence was right there. 3 games, 3 outcomes, all going in the same direction, and the tape backed it up. But here's what was happening underneath all of that. The Bengals were legitimately one of the best teams in football at this point. They weren't winning because of some scheme tricks or lucky bounces. Burrow was playing at an elite level. The offense was explosive, the defense was improved, and Cincinnati had genuine Super Bowl talent. They also had the confidence that came with beating Patrick 3 straight times, and that wasn't arrogance, it was earned. Now, Joe's public persona had fully crystallized at this point. The fur coats, the sunglasses, the effortless cool. He picked up the nickname Joe Burr, and it fit him perfectly. He wasn't trash talking in press conferences, but the vibe was unmistakable. This was a guy who had decided he was the best quarterback in the AFC and was playing like it every single week. The swagger wasn't performed, it was just who he was, and that attitude spread through the locker room. When you beat the best team in the conference 3 times in a row, it now changes how you carry yourself, and the Bengals believed they were the standard. Not a challenger, not a rising team, but the standard. That's the context you need to fully understand what happened next, because when Mike Hilton walked off the field after the Bills game and said what he said, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from a team that owned the Golden Boy and was heading back to Arrowhead for the AFC Championship with genuine belief they were the better team. The problem was what they did with it. There's a difference between believing you're gonna win and telling the other team's city that their stadium belongs to you now. One is competitive fire and the other is bulletin board material. And the Chiefs had a very long memory. The Bengals beat the Bills 27-10 in the divisional round, and it wasn't close. Cincinnati controlled the game from start to finish, and the defense made Josh Allen look uncomfortable for most of the afternoon. It was a statement win and the kind of performance that makes the rest of the league take notice. And then Mike Hilton took to the nearest camera.
See y'all in Burrowhead.
See y'all at Burrowhead. That was the quote. Short, direct, and aimed straight at Kansas City. Not Arrowhead Stadium where the Chiefs had played since 1972. Burrowhead. The implication was clear. That stadium didn't belong to the Chiefs anymore. It belonged to Joe Burrow, and it belonged to Cincinnati. Now, to be fair to Mike, the Bengals had earned the right to feel good about themselves. They had beaten Mahomes obviously multiple times in a row, and they had just won the AFC Championship game at Arrowhead the year before. The confidence wasn't coming from thin air. There was a real foundation underneath it. But there's a version of confidence that stays internal, that fuels your preparation and sharpens your focus. And then there's a version where you rename the other team's stadium after your quarterback on national TV. Those are two vastly different things. Hilton wasn't alone either. The Cincinnati mayor got involved, publicly taunting Kansas City ahead of the game. The city was loud, the fan base was even louder, and the whole narrative heading into the AFC Championship game was built around the idea that the Bengals were going to go back into Arrowhead Stadium and do what they had already done. Walk in, take over, and walk out with the W. But here's the thing about Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't need any extra motivation. The guy shows up to every game prepared to win. But if you want to give him a reason to be locked in from the very first snap, announcing to the world that his home stadium has a new name is a reasonable way to do it. Travis Kelce heard the comments, the entire Chiefs locker room heard the comments, and Kansas City, which had been bounced from the playoffs the year before by this same Bengals team, was not in a forgiving mood. There's a pattern in sports where teams that have been dominant for a long time develop a kind of institutional anger when someone challenges their dominance publicly. It was the Patriots before them for 20 years, and now the Chiefs had been the class of the AFC for 4 straight years before Burrow showed up. They had been to 2 Super Bowls in that stretch, winning 1. Mahomes had never lost back-to-back playoff games, and now a team that had beaten them 3 straight times in a row was calling their stadium by a different name in front of the entire country. The Bengals had the results to back up the confidence, and Kansas City wasn't afraid of Cincinnati. They were angry at them. And that's a way more dangerous version of the Chiefs than the one that had just shown up expecting to win. The 2022 AFC Championship game was set. Bengals at Arrowhead, January 29, 2023, and we were all tuned in. The Bengals were coming in with 3 straight wins over Mahomes, a full city behind them, and a nickname for the stadium they were about to play in. The Chiefs were coming in with something quieter and more focused. There was a real calm before the storm. January 29, 2023, Arrowhead Stadium, or Burrowhead, depending on who you ask. The Bengals came in riding high off of everything we've talked about. Cincinnati had every reason to believe this game was going to go the exact same way the last 3 had. But Kansas City had a different energy from the opening snap. Mahomes was precise early, not flashy, not improvising, just methodical and sharp. The Chiefs controlled the tempo from the start, moving the ball efficiently and keeping the Bengals' offense on the sideline. Kansas City's offensive line, which had been a liability in previous matchups against Cincinnati's pass rush, held up far better than they had the year before. Mahomes had time to go through his reads. He wasn't scrambling to survive, he was operating. The Bengals hung around, and that's honestly the best way to describe it. Cincinnati obviously wasn't blown out, and Burrow made some plays, and so did Jamar Chase, especially on some big 4th downs. The offense moved the ball in stretches, but the swagger that had defined this team all season, the loose, confident, we've been here before energy, didn't show up in the same way it had during the regular season. The Chiefs were faster to the ball, tighter in coverage, and more physical at the line of scrimmage than the Bengals had seen from them before. Kansas City had clearly watched the tape from all 3 losses and made adjustments. Mahomes finished with 326 yards and 2 TDs, no turnovers, and he took the Chiefs on 2 long scoring drives in the second half that chewed clock and kept Burrow watching from the bench. Now, the final sequence of this game is something Bengals fans will argue about for probably a really long time. The game was tied 20-20 late in the 4th quarter, and with a chance to tie or take the lead, Mahomes had the ball. The offense had moved the ball close to Cincinnati territory, then Mahomes scrambled towards the sideline and got hit out of bounds. The officials threw a flag. It was a late hit. The penalty gave Kansas City a fresh set of downs and put Harrison Butker in field goal range. Bengals fans were furious, and the call was controversial at first, but on replay and a few years removed, honestly, that was just a really dumb play. The man was like 3 steps out of bounds and he still hit him. Cincinnati's sideline erupted, but the flag stood and the drive continued. With Butker hitting the game-winning field goal, the Bengals got the ball back with like 3 seconds left and Kansas City wound up winning 23-20. The Bengals didn't just lose, they had talked all that trash and lost on top of it. That's a hard thing to process. Cincinnati had been the better team in stretches, Burrow had opportunities, but they couldn't capitalize. That's football. Mahomes, to his credit, had put the Chiefs in a position where one call could win the game, and that's what elite quarterbacks do. They find a way to win the game. After the final whistle, Travis Kelce grabbed the microphone during the celebration and delivered his response to the Cincinnati mayor who had spent the week talking trash.
For that Cincinnati mayor, know your role and shut your mouth, you jabroni!
It was loud and it was direct, and it landed exactly the way Kelce intended. The Bengals had walked into that week with all the words, and Kansas City walked out with the trophy. Mahomes had answered every piece of trash talk on the field, and Kelce handled the rest. The revenge arc was complete. But the real story, the one that would define both franchises for years, was just beginning. Because what happened after that AFC Championship game didn't just settle a rivalry, it separated 2 franchises headed in completely different directions. After that AFC Championship, the two franchises went in completely opposite directions, and the gap between them has only grown wider every year since. Kansas City went on a run that nobody in the modern era has matched. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl in the 2022 season, then came back and won it again in 2023. Back-to-back titles, 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. They became the defining dynasty of the 2020s and the team that every other franchise is measuring itself against. Mahomes now has 3 Super Bowl MVPs, 2 league MVPs, and a playoff record that puts him in the conversation with the greatest quarterbacks who have ever played. When you look at what he's done before the age of 30, the argument for top 3 all time isn't a stretch anymore, it's the honest assessment. The infrastructure Kansas City built around him never stopped working. Andy Reid kept scheming, the front office kept finding pieces, Travis Kelce stayed, and when one weapon left, another emerged. The Chiefs didn't just get lucky with Mahomes, they built an organization capable of maximizing him every single year. That's what separates a good team from a dynasty. Good teams have great players, dynasties have systems that sustain greatness. Now look at Cincinnati. The Bengals haven't made the playoffs since the AFC Championship loss, not once. The window that looked wide open in January 2023, the one with Burrow at 26, Chase in his second year, and Higgins developing into a legitimate 1B, that window didn't stay open the way everyone expected. Burrow had a wrist injury in November 2023 and missed the rest of that season. He came back in 2024 and played at an MVP level, 4,918 yards, 43 touchdowns, and a 108.5 passer rating, all while making his second Pro Bowl. The individual performance was elite, but the team still missed the playoffs at 9-8. Then in 2025, a turf toe injury cost him significant time again, and Cincinnati's season fell apart before it ever really started. However, the injuries don't tell the whole story. The Bengals went cheap on the offensive line, the same offensive line that got Burrow killed early in his career and never fully fixed it. The supporting cast that surrounded him in 2021 and 2022 was never rebuilt to that level. Jamar Chase eventually got paid and stayed. T. Higgins stayed too after a long contract dispute. But the depth, the cohesion, and the organizational commitment to building a complete roster around a franchise QB, that never materialized the way it needed to. The contrast is stark. Mahomes has a franchise that treats every offseason like a championship is on the line because for them, it always was. Burrow has spent the last 3 years fighting injuries and organizational decisions that have made his job harder than it really needed to be. He's still one of the best quarterbacks in football, but being great at quarterback isn't enough if the people around you aren't committed to the same standard. The Bengals had Mahomes' number, they had the moment, and they had Burrowhead. They let it all slip away. Not in one dramatic collapse, but slowly, quietly, through a series of decisions that compounded over time. One built a dynasty, the other watched their window close. The Bengals peaked the moment they started talking trash, and Mahomes didn't respond with words. He responded with 3 straight Super Bowl appearances and 2 more rings, and that's the answer that lasts. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you're new.